Masters at the UWI St. Augustine campus, joins us virtually. Mr. Das, as you were continuing your arguments, and you mentioned the fact that fully independent and nations within the Caribbean, as well as those who are republic states, of course, should actually subscribe to the CCJ. Is the argument that you're making essentially that it completes the cycle of independence?
Right. So, for all intents and purposes, yes. If you are fully independent and you have the ability to make rulings on different jurisprudences in the Caribbean region, then you should rely on your former colonial masters. It shows a level of weakness in the justice system, and that should not happen, in the independent states where they have that clarity or that area of expertise to make those rulings. So, yes, independence and authority and court of appeal in the region would be better suited.
What about what are the major points that we've heard against the CCJ that has been argued already? Is that it may lead to bias because of the appointment of judges to the courts, and that it cannot be trusted. So what's about access to justice when it comes to the CCJ?
Well, there's some merit in that, because justice for all means that everyone has the ability to have kind of court of appeal, and their decisions move to that court of appeal. But as it stands right now, carrying out a case to the Privy Council costs hundreds of thousands of dollars, and the average citizen just can't afford that. So the access, particularly, is a major downfall when it comes to the Privy Council, as well as the ability to have different expertise in jurisprudence in different areas at the same time.
But does distance matter in any way at all? Distance that the Privy Council is in England, the Caribbean Court of Justice is right here in Port of Spain, the headquarters are based here in Port of Spain. Does distance have anything to do with access to justice?
Distance, not so much. Cost, yes. Right, that's the major argument there. But the final argument basically is that we need to move away, to be independent of the decisions of the Privy Council as our former colonial masters. And I don't think the distance would have, every court of appeal was in Jamaica or Barbados at the same time, it would be far from Trinidad and Tobago, not as far as the Privy Council, but distance wouldn't matter as such as cost, to hear the matters, because, like I said, the average citizen wouldn't be able to afford it.
All right, Mr. Das, we're going to again have to pause on that point there, just due to one little niggle on our end. But please hold on that, because when we come back, there's still a lot more to get into this particular conversation. So guys, we're going to take a quick break. When we return, we'll continue the conversation.
Every word, every line, every paragraph depicts a real moment in someone's life. A father, a sister, a mother, a brother. We at Newsday are dedicated to you, the people, and through independent, unwavering journalism, strive to always bring your stories to life. Because your stories are more than just words. Newsday, independent and credible.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, The Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity, from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378, or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
You are watching Strictly Legal on WESN Content Capital. Just give an overview of what exactly is that split arrangement.
Now you don't need to register nothing. We can do that another time. But then it becomes a hit, and then everybody starts to want to claim.
The laws that predate many of the independent countries' constitutions are going to be those colonial laws.
We know there are an infinite amount of circumstances that would lead to a murder.
I have a great idea and I have a great concept, but until it's actually expressed, it does not become intellectual property.
Accomplishments or targets of a forensic accountant is to quantify what may have been lost.
We believe we defend criminals and we manipulated the law and we exploited the system.
A responsible journalist will reach out to the person who they have the information on for a comment.
Imagine a world where arguments don't exist. CICR is a full-service conflict resolution company that offers mediation training and workshops for all. In 2024, our 40-hour workshops are back, giving you all the tools you need to become a certified mediator in Trinidad and Tobago. Want to know more? Call us at 768-6778 or visit our website. Let's work together to make the world a better place.
Knowing how to tell authentic is as easy as 1, 2, 3. Find it, match it, search it. Step 1. Find the style number on the tag. Step 2. Match the style number inside the jersey with the number on the tag. Step 3. Search it. A quick Google search of the style number will verify the jersey is authentic when the search results match the jersey being searched. Don't be fooled by counterfeit jerseys. Before you buy, remember to find it, match it, search it.
Fan Zone, 2 locations nationwide. Center City Mall, Chaguanas and Movietown, Port of Spain. Nationwide delivery available.
Join me, Dr. Nalini Kokaram, on What's Up Doc, where we discuss all your burning questions concerning health.
Trinidad and Tobago is among one of the highest risk group of patients that develop this form of genetic breast cancer.
What I'd like to take home from a short interview like this, screening. You must screen.
Because it's silent.
It's silent.
Yeah.
And because it's silent, you don't know it's there.
What's Up Doc, every Tuesday and Thursday on WESN, Content Capital.
We are tackling the hard-hitting topics, some controversial topics, some topics we sweep under the rug. You don't always have to forgive in a relationship for it to move forward.
If it is you are in a situation where you forgive the person, but to the detriment of yourself, what are you really doing?
It is very uncommon for somebody in the younger age group to have dementia.
Atheists don't not believe.
Is that I can't disprove God, but you also can't prove God, so we kind of have a stalemate.
We'll focus on the woman who's being the victim,
right,
or the man has been the victim. We exclude the children.
Folks are trying to study the underlying brain mechanism to figure out how does this particular disorder happen in the brain? How is the brain processing this?
Don't worry about AI, worry about humans working with AI.
Are you willing to learn new skills to stay relevant for the future job market? That's the challenge that people are going to struggle with.
Every word, every line, every paragraph depicts a real moment in someone's life. A father, a sister, a mother, a brother. We at Newsday are dedicated to you, the people, and through independent, unwavering journalism, strive to always bring your stories to life. Because your stories are more than just words. Newsday, independent and credible.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, The Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378 or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
You are watching Strictly Legal on WESN Content Capital. Just give an overview of what exactly is that split arrangement.
Nah, you don't need to register nothing. You don't need, we can do that another time. But then it becomes a hit, and then everybody starts to want to claim.
The laws that predate many of the independent countries' constitutions are going to be those colonial laws.
We know there are an infinite amount of circumstances that would lead to a murder.
I have a great idea and I have a great concept, but until it's actually expressed, it does not become intellectual property.
Accomplishments or targets of a forensic accountant is to quantify what may have been lost.
They believe we defend criminals and we manipulated the law and we exploiting the system.
A responsible journalist will reach out to the person who they have the information on for a comment.
We apologize for the extended break, ladies and gentlemen. That's okay, nevertheless, as we continue the arguments this morning in favor of the CCJ over the Privy Council. Now, before we took the last break, we were speaking about the cost of going to the Privy Council versus the cost associated with a case being heard at the CCJ. Now, just to actually give you some information in respect to that, the Privy Council often only hears cases for death penalty or for commercial uses. In fact, the Privy Council hears between 10 to 15 appeals per annum. This is an average, by the way, for Jamaica, 15 to 20 from Trinidad, and very few to none from other territories. So let's continue that conversation as I welcome back Mr. Das to continue the conversation. Mr. Das, isn't that the Privy Council is only subscribed to by the wealthiest? It's not a court that will allow for ordinary people to often hear their cases in it, simply because of the costs associated with going to the Privy Council. What about the Caribbean being able to develop its own jurisprudence, its own understanding and confidence in decision makings when it comes to the law? Is that something that we see taking place within the Privy Council?
Not in the Privy Council, but in the CCJ. Jurisprudence. The Privy Council operates on their own jurisdiction with the jurisprudence that they developed over the past years. And some may argue in the Caribbean that that would hold precedence over the ones developed in the Caribbean because of that strong legal standing, legal background, legal experts, and of course the court's reputation to be
So there seems to be a disconnect in some regards between the Privy Council and the Caribbean. Is that why at times you might see judges within the Caribbean being a bit cautious because their judgments could be overruled if it goes to the Privy Council? The Privy Council not necessarily Caribbean-centric as the CCJ is.
Well, that's an argument on its own merit. I wouldn't say they are cautious because they practice the law to the full extent based on their legal expertise and experience. I say that they are cautious for their rulings to be overturned. I think that they are developing a unique set of Caribbean jurisprudence and they're developing capacities along the way. Now, they are experts as well. Some of them even train in different parts of the world coming back to the Caribbean and exercising their experience in the development and capacity building process. Within the Privy Council, they operate in a different set of jurisprudence, and yes, they could overturn a decision as they have done in the past. And I think the Caribbean judges, would feel a sense of independence if we would make that move to the final court of appeal for the Caribbean. So, it would give us strength to build capacity in the future and to create our own, developmental purpose for the CCJ as they have been doing. They had a conference recently and they agreed on certain developments, and legal practices in the Caribbean that would even influence the judge's decision, when ruling. So that in itself shows that we are doing our part in development so far for the CCJ, and we are developing our Caribbean jurisprudence further.
Mr. Das, let me ask you, in what capacity for CARICOM, by extension CSME, is the CCJ necessary? Is the CCJ needed for CARICOM, for CSME, to be fully functional as it was intended to be?
Definitely it's needed as we speak. I think the regional heads should agree, and we should come to some sort of a consensus to make the CCJ our final court of appeal. For course matters, for jurisdiction matters, also for independence matters and dependency matters. You could even argue for speed of outcome, from having to rely on the Privy Council versus the CCJ. So there are multiple aspects that prove that it's justified and it's needed.
Are there any other courts, though, that exemplify or actually represent a model that the CCJ can be to these unions, to these political and economic unions? For example, are there any arguments to be made within the OECS, the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, within even the European Union, for example, where these courts exist that really help with economic development, even trade disputes, for example?
So I would argue for us to use any other court of appeal outside of the Caribbean right now. I think it's best that we, have that argument within our own boundaries, CARICOM, being that CCJ would exemplify the pinnacle of jurisprudence development in the Caribbean region, to hear our cases based on the development of our cultural dynamics and the rulings that happen here. So I wouldn't move far out of that, and I wouldn't look to the OECS or the EU, because they haven't certainly falling apart in different areas and structural developments in the EU as we speak. So those things can happen based on jurisdiction and based on court systems. But I would suggest that we stick to the Caribbean region and we develop our capacities and we move forward with that.
Now, in your educated opinion, do you think that a referendum is necessary here in Trinidad and Tobago? Referendums are costly, and as I had a debate last week with a couple of the colleagues, they don't necessarily want to see a Brexit type situation when it comes to arguing with the CCJ. But do you think that is the direction we should be heading?
Okay. So when you think about democracy and the areas of concern when it comes to representation and freedom, referendums are absolutely necessary to uphold democratic traditions. I think we should be moving in the opposite direction. Although it may be costly and lengthy, fact is, if we exemplify freedom, if we exemplify the principles of democracy, and we relate to them based on the tradition, and we uphold those principles, then yes, we should definitely be headed in that area, and we should even look at it further.
But we're still so very much divided on this issue. Do you see anything that resembles a referendum happening anytime soon?
No, I don't see it happening yet because of that divide and because of the political will to do so. But in the future, it's very possible, if we come to a common consensus on it.
I'm still trying to understand exactly why there seems to be so much division over full membership to the CCJ. But Mr. Das, I'll tell you what, we're going to have to pause in it. We're going to have part 2 to this conversation, because we're going to have to explore whether or not there are any cons as well, whether or not there are pros with respect to remaining with the Privy Council. So let's just pause it there. Let's say this is the foundation for greater conversations to come.
Very well. Sounds good.
Thank you very much, Mr. Das. All the very best to you.
Thank you again.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we take a break here on AM Prime, and retain the conversations will continue.
Every paragraph depicts a real moment in someone's life. A father, a sister, a mother, a brother. We at Newsday are dedicated to you, the people, and through independent, unwavering journalism, strive to always bring your stories to life. Because your stories are more than just words. Newsday, independent and credible.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, the Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378 or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
You are watching Strictly Legal on WESN Content Capital. Just give an overview of what exactly is that split arrangement.
In the studio, now you don't need to register nothing. You don't need. We can do that another time. But then it becomes a hit, and then everybody starts to want to claim.
The laws that predate many of the independent countries' constitutions are going to be those colonial laws.
We know there are an infinite amount of circumstances that would lead to a murder.
I have a great idea and I have a great concept, but until it's actually expressed, it does not become intellectual property.
Accomplishments or targets of a forensic accountant is to quantify what may have been lost.
They believe we defend criminals and we manipulated the law and we exploiting the system.
A responsible journalist will reach out to the person who they have the information on for a comment.
Imagine a world where arguments don't exist. CICR is a full-service conflict resolution company that offers mediation training and workshops for all. In 2024, our 40-hour workshops are back, giving you all the tools you need to become a certified mediator in Trinidad and Tobago. Want to know more? Call us at 768-6778 or visit our website. Let's work together to make the world a better place.
Knowing how to tell authentic is as easy as 1, 2, 3. Find it, match it, search it. Step 1. Find the style number on the tag. Step 2. Match the style number inside the jersey with the number on the tag. Step 3. Search it. A quick Google search of the style number will verify the jersey is authentic when the search results match the jersey being searched. Don't be fooled by counterfeit jerseys. Before you buy, remember to find it, match it, search it.
Fan Zone, 2 locations nationwide. Center City Mall, Chaguanas and Movietown, Port of Spain. Nationwide delivery available.
Join me, Dr. Nalini Kokram, on What's Up Doc, where we discuss all your burning questions concerning health.
Trinidad and Tobago is among one of the highest risk group of patients that develop this form of genetic breast cancer.
What I'd like to take home from a short interview like this, screening. You must screen.
Because it's silent.
It's silent.
Yeah.
And because it's silent, you don't know it's there.
What's Up Doc, every Tuesday and Thursday on WESN, Content Capital.
We are tackling the hard-hitting topics, some controversial topics, some topics we sweep under the rug. You don't always have to forgive in a relationship for it to move forward.
If it is you are in a situation where you forgive the person, but to the detriment of yourself, what are you really doing?
It is very uncommon for somebody in the younger age group to have dementia.
Atheists don't not believe.
Is that I can't disprove God, but you also can't prove God, so we cannot have a stalemate.
We'll focus on the woman who's being the victim,
right,
or the man is being the victim. We exclude the children.
Folks are trying to study the underlying brain mechanism to figure out how does this particular disorder happen in the brain? How is the brain processing this?
Don't worry about AI, worry about humans working with AI.
Are you willing to learn new skills to stay relevant for the future job market? That's the challenge that people are going to struggle with.
Folks, we're back and better than ever.
Your show have always appeared to be a show that is focused on going to the cause or looking to the cause.
We hardly ever talk about the white-collar crime, though. We always talk about the ones that involve more as physical violence against individuals.
The citizens will only measure transmission when water starts to flow through their taps.
The Constitution doesn't talk about local election.
Contract mafia that's responsible for looting the country and they own and operate these politicians.
So if you are running a country and you can't say nothing as a prime minister, please take up your bag and go.
It is not comparative to the murder figures, but it is in fact very high.
I believe he's protecting certain individuals.
This is 10 Questions. I'm Andy Johnson. The distance from where we should be in the world in going forward on our commitments with climate change.
The effects of climate change that cannot be accounted for. It's called loss and damage. And we're seeing loss and damage happening so much more in this decade and the previous decade.
The principal term there was this question of the correspondent banking issues.
That is why we're trying to build capacity with this country here, Trinidad and Tobago, and other countries in the region. Man is not showing any signs of stopping or even slowing down. More than half of the forest in Trinidad is already gone.
All the plants and all the animals and all of the nice clean water and fresh air and everything had to be on this planet for humanity to have a chance.
We have small change when it comes to countries that can take decisions, and when they speak, the world listens.
The General Assembly is a very democratic forum. And Trinidad and Tobago has the same vote as Canada, in spite of the obvious difference in size.
The home of Caribbean content is growing, and we welcome you to be a part of the #1 platform for young personalities who are driven to make a positive impact in society. As we continue to reach every corner of Trinidad and Tobago through our daily broadcasts, our social media pages, or through our 75+ digital billboards across the nation, contact us to learn about our competitive rates via marketing at wesncc.com or call us at 628-5835. WESN Content Capital, television with a difference.
Welcome back to the program, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks so much for being with us this morning. And this part of the conversation goes back to what I suppose could be deemed as a mini-series as we speak about our coral reefs and their ecosystems, well, globally. But of course, as we're of Tobago, the Caribbean as a whole has a lot to offer. So coral research actually helps us have a greater understanding of the systems and the biodiversity, but it has also revealed just how vulnerable such systems are and exactly what needs to be done to save them. Now, the individual who has been very vocal about this and who joins me once more on AM Prime is Dr. Anjani Ganesh, a coral reef ecologist at the Institute of Marine Affairs. She joins us virtually. Hello, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me again.
Well, thanks so much for joining us once more. So, in reading your latest contribution to the conversation, you pointed out, firstly, that the University of Queensland, Australia, they've been able to map over, well, close to 350,000 square kilometers of coral reefs. How has this mapping, this research, been a useful tool, in terms of management, conservation, and understanding of the coral reef ecosystems and their biodiversity?
So I think that the mapping of the technology of the satellite technology is helping us to get a broader and a and in some cases, a deeper understanding of where our reefs are. So if you track back to when we first started to dive, the reefs that were being dived were based on dive sites for recreational use or for exploration. And that was limited by the air in your tank. So how far a diver can get, how deep they can go, they would be able to map those reefs to that extent. And now we have satellite technology that can span the globe and be able to use its sensors to detect a much larger area of coral reefs. And as those sensors get better, as they get sharper, as we have the tools to detect, the changes of the color patterns and the textures of the imagery, we can now be able to map at a more precise scale and at a larger area, essentially.
Does this mapping, is it limited to depth? Could it go to depths or the limits to such?
Yes, definitely, and that's a great question. While the satellites have increased our spatial awareness of where the reefs occur around the world, we still are limited because it's a satellite image and the image cannot penetrate beyond a certain depth with the color changes in the water column. And so reefs below 30 meters still have to be mapped using other technology. So whether it is ROVs or underwater drones, and using other sort of innovative tools like eDNA, which is what I mentioned in the article, where you collect water samples of DNA that has been shed from organisms to give you an idea of the communities that are present in different areas.
The eDNA, what does that stand for? I'm sorry?
Environmental DNA.
Right.
So we shed a lot of DNA in our environment. Everything around us that's alive sheds cells. And right now we have the technology to be able to use that in that limited concentration to identify the communities around us.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Guinness, are there different types of coral reefs, different types of corals, of course, but are there different types of reefs?
100%. So reefs are classified by their environment. So mesophotic reefs, they occur between 30 meters and 150 meters depth. So meso meaning middle, photic meaning light. So it's a middle or low light environment, because you have aphotic, which is no light, and coral reefs cannot grow in that environment. And then you have shallow reefs where you have high light environments. And so light is one example of a changing environment which changes the types of reefs and how we can classify reefs. But you have reefs that are classified based on wave environments where certain corals can grow, certain corals can't grow. So I like to think of reefs like snowflakes. Every reef is shaped by the environment around it, and every reef is unique to some extent.
Well, if you've said that mesophotic reefs are a sort of the middle ground, they have coral reefs that are blooming beyond 150 meters?
They are coral reefs, but they grow without the presence of light. So they're deep sea reefs that grow in the absence of light, and they grow very, very slowly, but they still have a very critical role in providing habitat for organisms in the deep ocean. And I'm talking about, much deeper than where you have the mesophotic zone. So light penetrates perhaps between 150 and maybe to I'd say 300 meters of the top part of the ocean. But there you have thousands of meters below that have the majority of the ocean, which is without light. And you do get corals that grow on the bottom of the ocean. It takes, thousands of years to get to a certain size. They grow very slowly, and it's a very difficult area, as you can imagine, to study and to understand.
I think it's still incredible to learn that they are still existing beyond 150 meters, because all that's been taught us about coral reefs and the importance of the temperature of the water and the sunlight penetrating the water. And that's rather incredible. But then it also, mesophotic reefs, it fascinates me even more. And you've actually focused a lot on mesophotic reefs in your articles. Why are they important in particular?
Well, I was personally fascinated because my former supervisor, he studied mesophotic reefs. So he had the technology and the tools, and he would go diving for very short periods of time to collect genetic information of those corals. And I think the idea that he had was that mesophotic reefs could potentially be a refuge for climate change because the waters are generally cooler. You have some species that can occur in the shallow reefs and in the mesophotic areas. And so when the shallow areas get bleached and impacted with mortality, there can be some reseeding from that mesophotic sites. What we are seeing, unfortunately, is that refuge that refuge theory is becoming we're seeing the deep being impacted just as much as the shallow areas. And so there may be pockets of refuge, but it all depends on how severe the changes in climate are.
Well, we've often spoken about changes in climate, but what is most intriguing now is how neighboring environments can actually impact upon coral reefs, and how the health of a coral reef could also impact upon neighboring environments. And one such example that you've spoken about is the relationship between seabirds and coral reefs. And I thought it was quite amazing. Could you please expand a bit more on what we've learned thus far between seabirds and coral reefs?
Yes, for sure. I thought it was a very interesting study that was done in the Chagos archipelago in the Indian Ocean. So if you can imagine, this archipelago is a series of inhabited and uninhabited islands. And the researchers, they looked at uninhabited islands, but they compared islands that were infested with rats because of human transport and commerce, and islands that were free of rats. And a lot of these islands are also seabird colonies. So you have the seabird colonies on the land, and then you have the coral reefs that sort of fringe the islands. And what they realized is that there was a relationship that was built up between the seabird colonies and the coral reefs, a beneficial one, where the guano, or the bird poop of the seabirds, would add nutrients to the water column and sort of feed, in a sense, or provide, essential nutrients for the corals to grow and whatnot. In areas on islands where the rats infested, unfortunately, it decimated the bird population. And what happens is that it changed that dynamic with the reefs. So they were able to see evidence of this relationship by looking at damselfish. And damselfish are unique in the sense that they don't just graze algae, they grow algae like farmers. And so they'll find a piece of dead coral, they would plant their algae, and they would tend to it. And what they found is that on rat-infested islands, the algae gardens were huge, but they were low in nutrition. So they couldn't get enough nutrition, so they had to grow more and plant more. But in the on the islands where there was a healthy, thriving bird population, the algae gardens were very small and they were rich in nutrients. And because of that, the damselfish, they're very territorial. They were defending their little turf much more fiercely. So they saw evidence in the behavior changes of the fish, but also in the composition of the reefs, because when you have larger turf algae gardens, it means that it's impacting on the corals, because the corals can't settle as much because there are limited areas for suitable corals to settle on. So a simple changes in the dynamics on land can have consequences in the reefs below. And we do have examples of that in the Caribbean with respect to like human activities and whatnot.
Wow, so you even linked the damselfish to being farmers, where they actually grow their own algae, and then you've got manure being provided by the seabirds. It's amazing when you look at nature. We're not too far apart, aren't we?
No, we're not.
No,
that's how we can learn from nature, for sure.
But do seabirds benefit or see any benefits at all when they are contributing to these coral reefs and their health? How do seabirds benefit?
Well, the seabirds, they fish off of the coral reefs. And remember, reef habitats are sort of nursery grounds and habitats for a lot of marine life. And so they get their food from the coral reefs. I'm not sure if there's a direct link, circling back, between the damselfish and the turf algae, but they depend on thriving reefs and healthy oceans. So it's sort of that benefit.
And what you also mentioned, which really, it was a great point in the sense that damselfish, when you saw near rat-infested islands where bird populations were lower, yes, damselfish had large, algae farms, if you'd like to call it that, but it were very low in nutrients. But then when they were near to islands that were heavily populated by birds, whilst there may be smaller pockets of algae farms, they were high nutrition, and they became very territorial. So is it that these factors that you mentioned also have an impact on the way that fish behave? Does it change their behavioral patterns in any way?
For sure. I think, so damselfish are naturally territorial, so they will defend their turf. And we see it in Tobago all the time. We do surveys underwater, and if we come across a garden, you will have some species that will swim past your mast and try to get and nip at you and try to get away from you. But what I think the environment does is it exaggerates certain behaviors, right? So if they were aggressive before, they would probably get more aggressive if their turf gardens aren't doing well, right? Naturally, right? So, and you do see that changes in behavior. I think I mentioned with the butterfly fish, as their environment changes, their behavior also changes.
Could we link that back to human beings as well? Because as I'm saying, the relationship is quite amazing when you study it. We're not that much different. I mean, even you use the example that in times of desperation, human beings will always look for the closest source of food, of shelter. It may change the way they think, the way they act, and what they seek. Is that also the case with fish and coral reefs? If the temperature changes within the waters, if the amount of sunlight reaching the waters, the nutrients within the waters, the algae farms, do we see that happening as well?
Yeah. So we have to adapt in times of needs. There's the hierarchy of needs, right? For humans, there's food, shelter, things to survive, and the same applies for marine life. So the example I give in the article is the butterfly fish. So after a coral bleaching event or a reef disaster where the structures have been lost, butterfly fish will swim further away from their home range in search of food. And in doing that, they would come across, other fish of different species that they would have conflict with. And so you'd see these conflicts increasing in times of high coral mortality because they're more desperate for seeking food out or seeking some form of nutrition. And yeah, so you do get those adaptive changes in behavior. I think, once things come back to normal, their behavior will also readjust, right? But we are seeing a lot of changes and adaptations in behavior of marine organisms, for sure.
My final question to you this morning, Dr. Nace, is could it also lead to, perhaps an explosion in certain fish populations? We know down here we see the instance of the lionfish, and that was a huge problem. But the examples of which you've spoken about this morning, does it also explain why we are possibly seeing more and more of these species popping up everywhere, invasive species?
Yeah. Yes. Well, that's one example of where we look at and where scientists have seen invasive species significantly change the ecology and the behavior of native populations. So lionfish is a good example where lionfish, they basically can engulf huge amounts of juvenile populations of fish species, which means that they're eating a lot of the juveniles of groupers, parrotfish, a lot of fish species that are important for the healthy reef environment, but also help for our commercial fish species. And so when you have an invasion like that, it is very difficult for organisms to adapt to counteract. So that's when humans need to step in to control and manage the environment so that our native populations don't get decimated. Over time, I imagine that there would be some adaptation naturally, but that time frame is way too long before, any significant decimation happens.
Well, Dr. Ganesh, I want to thank you so much for joining me this morning. As I mentioned at the start, it seems as though it's a bit of a mini-series in terms that we've been doing with the conversations that we've had and we are going to have. So thank you so much for joining me once more. Looking forward to the next time.
Yes, take care. My pleasure.
All the very best to you. Well, we will have more conversations, of course, on coral reef ecosystems and that biodiversity. And I'm always pleased to welcome Dr. Ganesh to the program. And we thank her for her contribution. And if ever you get the opportunity, I will encourage you to even find that opportunity to follow Dr. Anjani Ganesh and her columns, of which are published in the Newsday newspaper. Ladies and gentlemen, we take a break here on WSN's AM Prime, and when we return, we'll get into more discussions this morning. We'll be right back.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, the Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378 or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
Welcome back to AM Prime, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for being with us this morning. We've got some good news to share with you, and it's always wonderful when we have that. This is in relation to the Pan-African Leadership Institute. Miss Vashti Gaideen has been appointed as the new ambassador to Trinidad and Tobago. So congratulations to her, but in doing so, we all have questions as to exactly what does this mean? What is the Pan-African Leadership Institute? Well, the individual best suited to answer the question, Ms. Vashti Gaideen, joins us virtually. Good morning, Ms. Gaideen. Welcome back to AM Prime.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you? Congratulations on your appointment.
Thank you so much.
And we are also pleased and honored to welcome to the AM Prime this morning the president and co-founder of the Pan-African Leadership Institute, Dr. Kofi Osei-Kusi. Good morning, sir. Welcome to the program.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for joining us. Now, I'll start with you, Ms. Gaideen. Congratulations once more. But you've done some phenomenal work throughout your career, and this is just another step up. precisely what does this appointment mean to you and mean for you?
Thank you so much again. So within the last 5 years, I've been at the TTCSI and we have been focusing on developing a cadre of services exporters. And part of that involves building capacity. And if you need to go out there, this is why when I did a course at Poly, it stood out for me because it's a leadership programs that really gets to the core, your soul, in terms of becoming a transformative leader. So this is where I tie in the learnings from this program in terms of how do I help our service providers to go global. So this is what I intend to do because Poly has a network, an alumni base of roughly 42 countries. So as in my role as ambassador for Poly to Trinidad and Tobago, the intention is to build on that network. How do we connect our Caribbean people to markets elsewhere using the Poly network?
Well, Dr. Usir Kusi, you are the president and co-founder of Poly, and your story in itself is quite rich. Even your volunteerism work with youth at disadvantaged communities. Please tell us a bit more about yourself, because I can read all about you and I could explain so much, but it's best hearing from the individual themselves.
Thank you very much again for having me. Well, it's a long story, but to sum it all up, for me, my life is a story of service, which is exactly what leadership is all about. The whole purpose of leadership is to serve, a group of people or a community or a particular course in order to achieve a bigger goal. And so I started with serving young people across our country, Ghana, and then going beyond our nation, serving young people, supporting young people with disabilities, helping them go through school on educational scholarships, and then ultimately now serving leaders on 5 continents in over 42 nations, providing one of the best, most pragmatic leadership programs. And so it's still service, it was service, and hopefully it will always be service and serving people, which is exactly what leadership is about.
Oh, wonderful. And that is where I come back to Ms. Gayodine. The big theme this morning is, of course, service and leadership, and your work throughout your career, which also includes working with the Arthur Lockjack Global School of Business, the TNT Chamber of Industry and Commerce, the Economic Development Board. I mean, it's quite a lot, but does this step now as the ambassador to Trinidad and Tobago on the part of Poly just signify all the work that you've done and all the work that you intend to do?
Correct. So at this point in time, it's about going global. And in going global, this is why the training provided by Poly, it's the foundation block. So this is where I'm going to help our service providers to transition outside. Because it's not just me talking, I have also walked the walk here. I have done the corporate leadership program at Poly, and it really was a transformative experience for me. So I'm not just speaking just off the block. I've gone through the rigor of the training program.
Dr. Usir Kusi, let's speak about Poly now so we get a better understanding. Tell us a bit more about Poly's vision, its mission, and precisely its workings.
Absolutely, absolutely. So to start with, I believe that leadership is the greatest force on the face of the earth, the greatest force as well as the greatest need of every community, of every institution. What the whole world is looking for is leaders, it's quality leaders. Nations are crying for better leaders. Organizations and institutions and schools and colleges are all looking for leaders, quality leaders, because we know that everything rises and falls on leadership. And the exciting part is that leadership is not just something you are born with, or or something you have or don't have, but leaders are made. Leadership skills can be acquired. And so the purpose of Pali is helping to develop three things, what we call holistic, entrepreneurial, and conscientious leaders. Every leader to leadership. That is called integrity. Every leader must bring themselves holistically, intellectually, psychologically, emotionally, socially. Every area of your life, you bring it excellently into leadership. The second thing is entrepreneurial. No matter the field you find yourself, whether you're in media, whether you're in politics, whether you're in philanthropic leadership, you must think like an entrepreneur. And so in all of these courses and programs that we run, we equip leaders to be holistic, to have an entrepreneurial mindset, and also to be conscientious, which is about leading from the heart, which is about service, which is what we see as a major gap in the area of leadership globally, where you have many leaders just looking after themselves and not looking after the people that they were called to serve, or they were elected to serve, or where they were positioned to serve. And so this is the gap, the massive gap that Pali is filling globally. And more importantly, these programs are not just theoretical programs. They are practical, pragmatic programs that leaders face on a daily basis. And that is why leaders of all levels, whether they are pilots, they come through Pali to improve their leadership skills. Medical doctors, media personnel, accountants, bankers. Everybody, wherever they find themselves working with other people, require better leadership skills in order to effectively lead people. Let me end on this point. There's a big difference between management and leadership. A lot of people are managing people instead of leading people. And there's a big difference. You don't manage a human being. You manage resources. You manage time and money and capital and so on and so forth. But a human being is led. We don't manage people. And part of the struggles that institutions are facing, and the answer that Pali is providing in the area of leadership development.
Dr. Osei-Krusi, just to expand a bit further, there have been debates not just locally but globally about leadership and a lack of leadership there. We don't have to go into the entire debate, but the philosophy of which you've just explained to us, that leadership philosophy, how integral is it to bridging that gap and bridging the divide of which we are now noticing and seeing?
I beg your pardon, I think I missed a little part of your question.
The philosophy of which you speak of, the leadership gap that exists, the leadership gap that globally we are now speaking about, this philosophy, how important is it, how integral is it to bridging that gap?
Absolutely, absolutely, it does, because leadership is not just about positions, it's about the capacity to influence, and every single person has the capacity to influence. And so there is a need for self-awareness where people begin to realize the capacities that they have and how much they can develop their own personal capacities in order to become better leaders. And by experience, one of the things we've seen is that you can never stay at the bottom of life when you invest in your leadership skills, when you invest in your leadership capacity. And so the problem globally is that we are not investing enough in leadership skills and in leadership capacities. But when we start doing so, we're going to see the gap beginning to close, because there will be better leaders that serves their communities and their nations and their institutions for a more progressive, prosperous world that we are all looking to see.
Ms. Gaidin, given what Dr. Osei-Krusi has indicated, why is this so important to you personally? Why is this level of service, whether it be to the industry, to Trinidad and Tobago as a whole, why is it so important to you? What does it mean to you?
Sure. Well, I could start off this question going back to where I came from. I grew up with a father who was a teacher, and he embedded into all of his children that anybody who come in contact with you, they must leave better off. So in essence, I grew up with an environment that was about service. So Pali really cemented that for me. And Dr. Kofi's idea about leadership, particularly with respect to the holistic development of leaders, whereby in the training programs, all of the facilitators stress that it's not something that you switch off. You cannot switch off your professional life from your personal life. So when you have the right principles that transmit throughout everything that you do, and this again, it's your foundation blocks. So this is why it's critical about this holistic development.
But it also points to the importance of our leaders being nurtured from such a young age and having that guidance from such a young age. And I want to just switch back to Dr. Usei Kusi for a moment, because another important aspect of this entire conversation, of which I think I've missed thus far, is the cultural exchange and the cultural intelligence that Pali is providing and Pali is offering. We live in a globalized society, Dr. Usei Kusi, but sometimes we seem to forget about that, or we choose to ignore it. Cultural intelligence, do you see that as something being absolutely necessary if we are to push forward with good leadership?
You couldn't have overemphasized that. That is so critical. Cultural intelligence in this global village, it's a global world. And without cultural intelligence, we're going to fail, even within one nation. And one of the major gaps where leaders have struggled is the lack of cultural intelligence or cross-cultural skills. In this world, every leader needs to acquire the talent to be able to understand other cultures, to be able to engage other cultures, and to be able to bring people together. One of the unique things about Pali as well is the centering of African wisdom within the context of leadership development. Generally, globally, a lot of the leadership wisdom we receive is very Western driven, and that is awesome, but that is not holistic enough. Remember that to be an active leader and to be a holistic leader, you need to be well positioned to be able to embrace global wisdom. There is wisdom from the East, there is wisdom from China, wisdom here, wisdom from the West. What has been missing in the global piece is wisdom from Africa. Remember that Africa is the land of origins. That is where all humanity started from. That is where all the research supports that humanity started from. There is tremendous amount of wisdom from Africa. And through our courses, we discuss African wisdom, African proverbs, which helps to if you like, advanced leadership development. Example, there is the African concept of Ubuntu. And Ubuntu is the concept which says, I am because you are. I am because you are. And that's the belief of Pali regarding leadership. That leadership is not about the leader. It's about the fact that you are connected with other people and you are a leader just because there are people there for you to lead. And you are there to serve other people. And that pans through every single area of our lives. And so having this African leadership concept of Ubuntu helps to bring us together as a global community. That is why we're building the bridge between Africa and the Caribbean and around the world, because Ubuntu says, I am because you are. If I am better off, you're going to be better off. If I support you, I end up supporting myself. And so that is part of the cross-cultural intelligence that is weaved excellently through our leadership programs.
Hence Pan-Africanism. Well, Ms. Gayadeen, we are nearing the end of this interview, but given all that I've learned this morning, and given all that you would have learned through your fellowship with the Pan-African Leadership Institute, now that you've been appointed as an ambassador, how do you plan on utilizing not only the leadership skills that you would have gained, but also the cultural exchange, the promotion of cultural exchange and education opportunities? What are your plans for such when it comes to Trinidad and Tobago?
Well, first and foremost, we need to get Dr. Kofi down here. So we are looking forward to...
I agree.
Pretty soon. And
I can't wait.
And secondly, we are going to use the technology to connect Caribbean alumni with African alumni, because Ghana is the gateway to West Africa. It's a 300+ million market, And through the TTCSI last year launched a Doing Business with the World series. So we're going to have a series on doing business with Africa. And it's to start that. And that series is not just focused on trade and investment, but also cultural cuisine. So it's to build on that, because we have seen through Prime Minister Mia Mottley, there has been some emphasis on Africa. So now it's taking that further, because though we have a rich history, we have not had an exchange of information, learning about each other's culture. So this is going to be one of my immediate focus.
Do you think that there is an aligned vision? I mean, from what you said and from what Dr. Usei Kusi said, it would suggest such.
Yes, definitely.
Well, I'm so glad for that, and I look forward to the strengthening also for these relations and ties, to the opportunities that are to come. Well, Dr. Usei Kusi, thank you so very much for the work that you have done and you're doing, and thank you for joining me on the program. I look forward to welcoming you again, hopefully in person, the next time we meet to have a conversation.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Ms. Guidi, once more, congratulations on a tremendous achievement, and for all the work that you're doing with the TTCSI and now on the part of the Pan-African Leadership Institute. Well done, and thank you so much. It's always a pleasure having you on the program, and I look forward to our next conversation. All the very best to you.
Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's always good to share in some good news, and though the interview wasn't necessarily as long as we'd want it to be, because time is always a constraint, that's okay, because Ms. Guiding always makes herself available to AM Prime, and I look forward to welcoming Dr. Usei Kusi to the program. But it's always good to share, some news with you that is only positive and beneficial to us as a people. And I hope there is a lot more to come. The promises for more to come. So I look forward to sharing that with you in time. But let's take a break here on AM Prime, and when it reaches in, we'll welcome our final guest for this edition of the program.
WESN.
My name is Kama Mirage. As a lifelong entrepreneur, I often share the benefit of my experience with our young innovators and small businesses. Just as I strive to guide others, our Constitution must also foster an environment for citizens to thrive. This begins with education catering to diverse learning styles and extends to establishing frameworks that support new enterprise. But are we doing enough? Constitutional reform needs your input by 15 April at constitutionalreform2024.gov.tt. It's your future, your constitution, your voice.
The home of Caribbean content is growing, and we welcome you to be a part of the #1 platform for young personalities who are driven to make a positive impact in society. As we continue to reach every corner of Trinidad and Tobago through our daily broadcasts, our social media pages, or through our 75+ digital billboards across the nation, contact us to learn about our competitive rates via marketing at wesncc.com or call us at 628-5835. WESN Content Capital, television with a difference.
Folks, we're back and better than ever.
Your show have always appeared to be a show that is focused on going to the cause or looking to the cause.
We hardly ever talk about the white-collar crime, though. We always talk about the ones that involve more as physical violence against individuals.
The citizens will only measure transmission when water starts to flow through their taps.
The Constitution doesn't talk about local election.
Contract mafia that's responsible for looting the country, and and they own and operate these politicians.
So if you are running a country and you can't say nothing as a prime minister, please take up your bag and go.
It is not comparative to the murder figures, but it is in fact very high.
I believe he's protecting certain individuals.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
Next, the latest U.S. inflation data has come in hotter than expected for the third straight month. The Consumer Price Index for March up 3.5% on an annual rate. That's 0.3% higher than February's reading. Core inflation, which strips out volatile sectors like food and energy, sitting even higher at 3.8%. Perhaps most troubling for the Biden administration, though, is the super core reading, which also strips out housing prices. That hit 4.8% on a yearly basis, suggesting that inflation in the U.S. is going to be a stickier problem than previously expected. Markets had been expecting the Federal Reserve to begin cutting interest rates in June as inflation cooled in previous readings. That scenario, though, is now very much in doubt. President Biden says he does still expect the Fed to cut rates this year. Here he is.
Look, we have dramatically reduced inflation from 9% down to close to 3%. We're in a situation where we're better situated than we were when we took office, where inflation was skyrocketing. And we have a plan to deal with it, whereas the opposition, my opposition, talks about two things. They just want to cut taxes for the wealthy and raise taxes on other people.
And that's it for business, Solano.
Thank you very much for that, Brian. Brian Quinn there with the business news. Stay with us. More news coming up.
Join us on France 24 for a crucial and exciting election season. In June of this year, citizens from the EU's 27 member states will be asked to choose the next European Parliament made up of 720 MEPs. France 24's Talking Europe will bring you a series of special programs. We'll look at the political powerhouses in the EU and also talk about groups of countries and regions. We'll have debates for you with MEPs from different political parties, and we'll look at the key issues of our day that cut across national borders. Talking Europe takes you to the heart of the EU election campaign.
Talking Europe on France 24 and France24.com.
Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith.
All the latest in politics, economics and the arts in Africa on France 24. Our journalists are in every region, every country, to report on the emergence of a continent of unparalleled riches. Bringing you Africa's stories on France 24.
Thanks for joining us. See you again. Take care.
Liberté, égalité, actualité. France 24, your window on the world. Liberté, égalité, actualité.
Welcome back to France 24. This is Paris Direct. The headlines this hour. Hamas's leader says Israel is, quote, delusional if it thinks killing members of his family will change the group's bargaining position. This as pressure mounts on Benjamin Netanyahu to accept a ceasefire. Joe Biden says the bond between the United States and Japan is unbreakable. The US president hosted the country's prime minister as tensions with Pyongyang are on the rise. And a first for the Olympic Games, gold medal winners in track and field at the Paris 2024 Summer Olympics also set to get a $50,000 cash prize. The leader of Hamas says the group will not be softening its position in ceasefire negotiations. The statement from Ismail Haniyeh comes after an Israeli strike in Gaza killed his 3 sons and several grandchildren. The deaths come as pressure mounts on Israel to change tack after Washington called Netanyahu's approach to the war a mistake.
A humble makeshift grave for the family of the leader of Hamas. 3 sons and several grandchildren of Ismail Haniyeh killed in an Israeli drone strike near Gaza City. Witnesses described a gruesome scene.
3 of them were driving in the car and 3 drone strikes hit. 3 sons of Haniyeh and their children were hit. Their body parts went everywhere. There are even some remains on our house. We find a hand and a leg.
Israel says the 3 sons were targeted as Hamas operatives. Haniyeh, who learned of their deaths in Qatar, where he lives in exile, accused Israel of acting in the spirit of revenge and murder. He said Israel was delusional if it believed targeting his sons would push Hamas to change its position. The killings come at a time that ceasefire talks are ongoing in Cairo, while Israel remains relentless in its operation in Gaza. War Cabinet Minister Benny Gantz indicated on Wednesday that the enemy now poses little threat.
From a military point of view, Hamas is defeated. All its fighters are eliminated or in hiding, and its capabilities are crippled.
All along, that's been the stated intention of the war and the purpose of the planned final push into the southern city of Rafah, where more than half of Gaza's 2.3 million people have taken refuge. But Gantz added that those plans had not changed, saying the fight against Hamas would take time, as boys who are now in middle school would still fight in the Gaza Strip.
Joe Biden once again took aim at Benjamin Netanyahu for not doing enough to increase the flow of aid into Gaza. The US president says he'll be watching to see if the Israeli prime minister lives up to his commitments. Now, Washington is promising to stand by Israel in the face of retaliation from Iran. Tehran has vowed it will respond after its consulate was targeted in Damascus last week. While Israel hasn't claimed the strike, it's widely believed to have been behind the attack.
Hamas is part of Iran's evil axis that aims to destroy us. When we defeat Hamas, it's not just defeating Hamas, it's defeating the axis. Everyone in the Middle East, and also beyond it, is sitting in the stands and watching who will win on this field, Israel or Iran, and its proxies. You already know who will win.
Now, the New York Times is reporting that Iran has been flooding the occupied West Bank with arms. According to unnamed Iranian officials, the goal is to stir up unrest. The smuggling network reportedly began some 2 years ago. Tensions between Israel and Iran have been on the rise, but ratcheted up further after the Iranian consulate in Damascus was targeted. Tehran has warned Israel that a response is coming. Now, Joe Biden hosted the Japanese Prime Minister for a state dinner at the White House last night. Fumio Kishida's visit signals a transformation of Japan from regional to global player. During the dinner, Biden said the alliance between the two states was unbreakable.
It's the closest cooperation between Japan and the US since they became allies decades ago. After Biden announced plans to strengthen defense ties with Tokyo, Fumio Kishida hailed bilateral relations.
Our joint efforts are variable and dispensable for our bright future and for the peace and stability of the world. Let me conclude with a line from Star Trek, which you all know: to boldly go where no one has gone before.
Among the plans are a joint air and missile defence network with Australia. The US and its allies, including Japan, have been reinforcing their militaries in the face of what they view as a mounting threat from China in the South and East China Seas, and to prevent a Chinese invasion of Taiwan, a self-ruled island that Beijing views as its own. Beyond military cooperation, Biden said that the two nations bolstered science and education ties.
Those ties stretch up to the moon, where 2 Japanese astronauts will join future American missions, and one will become the first non-American ever to land on the moon.
On Thursday, Biden is set to host a trilateral summit between the US, Japan and the Philippines. It comes as Beijing ramps up pressure on the Philippines in the South China Sea over areas it claims but belong to Manila, according to international law.
Now, the European Parliament has approved an overhaul of the bloc's migration laws that aim to reduce irregular arrivals. EU officials are hoping to end years of division over how to cope with the influx. The vote on Wednesday comes ahead of the bloc's parliamentary elections slated for June, where the pro-EU political centre is hoping to stem gains by the far right. Now, EU leaders are sounding the alarm over potential Russian interference in upcoming EU elections. They're warning that the Kremlin is using disinformation in its attempts to sow divisions between European citizens. But they also warn of dangers coming from within the bloc.
Alleged Russian interference at the very heart of European politics. Longtime Latvian MEP Tatjana Zdanoka has been accused of spying for the Kremlin. She denies it, but she's now been sanctioned and fined by the European Parliament for breaching the MEP's code of conduct. The Parliament's president said the breach related to rules on the declaration of interests and receiving gifts. Zdanoka is not the only MEP accused of working for the Kremlin. The European Parliament is looking into allegations that several EU politicians have been paid to spread Russian propaganda. The allegations are connected to a Czech government investigation into a now shuttered pro-Russia media outlet called Voice of Europe. An activist group compiled a list of MEPs who featured on the channel, mostly members of far-right parties. Some of those on the list have denied they were paid for their appearances. German MEP Max Krah posted on social media that in the last 2 years he's given more than 200 interviews, 2 of them to Voice of Europe. There's no specific allegation that he was paid for any of these more than 200 interviews. But EU leaders accuse far-right parties of being willing collaborators of Vladimir Putin.
Whether this is the AfD in Germany or the Rassemblement National in France, the Confederacja in Poland or others. The names may be different, but their goal is the same. They are trampling on our values and they want to destroy our Europe, and we will never ever let this happen.
Leaders warn that Russia is attacking Europe on multiple other fronts, using techniques including cyber attacks and the spread of disinformation on social media. And they say the European elections in June are likely to be a special target for attempted Russian interference.
Next, Claire Bacquelin has been working on a series of reports about the Second World War. This June will mark 80 years since D-Day, when Allied troops landed in Normandy and liberated France from the Nazis. Last month, the National Remembrance Day for the victims of deportation to Nazi death camps will also take place. Claire, great to see you. Tell us exactly what you've been working on.
So this Remembrance Day for the victims of deportation, it happens on the last Sunday of every April, every year. So this year it's going to be the 28th of April, and I've been working on some reports leading up to that. When it comes to the victims of deportation, what we mean here in France is that's the 150,000 people who were deported from France to the Nazi death camps. Mostly Jewish people, but also members of the resistance, as well as some people from the travellers community as well. Of course, most of them ended up in the gas chambers, many of them in Auschwitz. Now, this year, the Remembrance Day on the 28th of April there will be very few people who actually lived through the Holocaust taking part, because simply there aren't very many of them left, and those who did live through the Holocaust were children. And I'm working on a report about this history, about the horror of what happened and how to pass down the history when the survivors all pass away. Now, for instance, one of them, Rachel Jedinak, she's 90 now. She was 8 during what's called the Veldiv roundup, when her mother was arrested. She was arrested alongside her sister and her mother. Her mother was killed in Auschwitz, and she and her sister managed to escape. They were hidden. They were called what's called the enfants cachés, so hidden children, kind souls in various different parts of France. Mostly Christian families took in these Jewish children to protect them, to stop them being arrested and deported. And Rachel is one of the few people left who can tell the story of what happened.
Nous ne sommes plus très nombreux à pouvoir témoigner. Les rangs se sont éclaircis. On peut nous compter sur les doigts de la main. Et donc, il faut transmettre jusqu'au bout. Les jeunes qui arrivent, qui ne savent rien, il faut leur expliquer ce qu'une guerre comme celle de la Deuxième Guerre mondiale a permis de faire, de tuer des millions d'innocents.
Now, Claire, can you tell us more about the Holocaust in France? What exactly happened here?
So what's worth noting, first of all, until the 70s, even the 80s in France, it really wasn't talked about much. There was this kind of collective, also political desire to move forward, focus on what the French resistance achieved, and many Jewish people felt that they just couldn't talk openly about what they and their families had been through. The mass deportation and murder of Jews was just not talked all about that much until the 80s and the 90s. People began opening up, and over the last 30 years efforts have really been made to raise awareness, and of course with the goal of preventing this from happening again here in France. Here in Paris, to give you an example, the city was occupied by the Nazis in July 1942. One of the most shameful memories here in France of the Second World War was what's called the Veldiv roundup. So the roundup of nearly 13,000 Jewish people, mostly women and children, were rounded up, put in a sports stadium in the capital, that's the Veldiv. They were kept there for a few days. Then they were taken to one of 2 camps outside Paris. The parents were then separated from their children and put on trains to Auschwitz. A few weeks later, the children were all put on trains to Auschwitz too, and of course, very few of them returned. And the horror of this is sort of magnified by the fact that it was French police, of course, working under the orders of the Nazis, but it was French police who were actually carrying out the arrests. And so this is very much a shameful moment here in France, but there aren't many people left who really witnessed what happened and who can tell the stories today.
It's an ugly memory, isn't it? So what are the options? How can history be passed down, if you will?
So there are efforts being made, and I took part in a big meeting at a high school in the 20th arrondissement of Paris. Now that's where a big Jewish community lived during the Second World War. It's always been a part of the capital where an immigrant population has lived. The Jewish community, many of them hailed from Eastern Europe and had escaped persecution there and ended up in that northeastern part of Paris. And in this high school where I visited, there's this meeting has been taking place. Now you can see them all there. This meeting over the last 30 years, every year in April, a group of students meet with speakers, people who lived through the Second World War, usually former resistance members, but also people who lived through the Holocaust, Jewish people. And what's interesting is that this year, the organizer, who used to teach at the school, he's retired now, but he comes back every year and does this, the organizer told me he was really scared that none of the students were going to turn up this year because it was a Friday afternoon, it was sunny outside, it felt a bit like the first day of spring, and
it looks packed.
It's packed. But he was worried because 30 years ago, or even 10 years ago, he was able to get a whole load of people who were in the resistance or who lived through the Holocaust who could come in and speak to the students. Now he could only get 2 because everyone's passed away. One of them, of course, is Rachel Jelinek, who we heard from a little earlier on. And I spoke to some of the students at the end and, so how did you find the meeting? What did Rachel tell you? She talked to them about what it was like wearing a yellow star in the streets of Paris, how she wasn't allowed to play in parks with the other children. It was written, forbidden for Jews to enter playgrounds. She told them what it was like, and they were really touched and moved by what she had to say.
How fascinating to learn history firsthand.
Yes.
What I would give to have that option. Now, you have the soundbite?
Yeah, I've got a soundbite from the students. We can play it now. If you listen to them now.
Ça permet de voir une personne qui a vécu cette période, ça permet vraiment d'incarner l'horreur qui s'est passée, et ça permet d'avoir un véritable point de vue, une véritable histoire, et ça touche plus profondément, je trouve.
C'est plus fort, puis c'est plus précis aussi, parce qu'en cours on voit ce qui s'est passé en général. Avoir un témoignage d'exemple de vie, c'est plus c'est plus humain, du coup, on comprend mieux ce qui s'est passé.
Now, Claire, you've also been looking into preparations that went into D-Day by the British, particularly some of their intelligence and deception tactics. Tell us more.
Yeah, I've got a report coming up for you a little bit later in the next few months. It's going to be time for the D-Day celebrations of the 80-year anniversary in the beginning of June. But I've started working on it now, so I just wanted to give you a sneak preview. Absolutely fascinating. All the quirky things that the British did. They got a bagpipe player to come to the beaches of Normandy to play the bagpipes to boost the morale of the troops. He lives and his son plays the bagpipes now. I'm going to meet him in the UK in the next few weeks. The BBC asked British people to send him holiday postcards of their holidays in northern France so they could try and map out what the coastline looked like. They also had this new machine which allowed them to work out when the tides were, when the moon was, how the weather was going to do, so they could find exactly the right sort of window of opportunity to actually make those landings. So yeah, it's a fascinating topic, and I'll be coming back on set and talking to you more about it in the next few weeks.
You've just given us an amuse-bouche, as we
Exactly.
say. Thank you very much for that, Claire Paquelin there. Now, it's set to be a first for World Athletics. Paris 2024 will be the first Summer Games where the 48 gold medal winners will also pocket a $50,000 cash prize. Lisa Kamenov reports.
The Olympic gold medal is the holy grail for all Olympians. But at the Games in Paris this summer, the track and field athletes will have their eyes on an additional prize, a $50,000 cash reward for those who take first place on the podium.
An athlete winning an Olympic title is likely to receive monies from a number of sources. This is a modest contribution. In addition to that, I want them to know that as the sport grows, that they too, you know, with reason, will become the beneficiaries of that.
The Olympics were originally considered an amateur sports event, with the IOC not awarding prize money. But athletes may receive payments from sponsors or their own federations and governments. This year's cash reward provided by World Athletics, the international sports governing federation, marks a symbolic break with the Games' amateur past. Gold medalists from 48 events will be rewarded with a total of $2.4 million paid out in prize money. Relay teams will also be given the same amount to be shared out among their members, an initiative which has been welcomed by athletes.
It's an improvement. It would have been nice for it to be last Olympics, but that's okay. We'll just have to go and win it this year again.
It's a very smart and good move by World Athletics. I think it's their way of showing that they want to push this even more into becoming a professional sport. It doesn't change my motivation, honestly.
Olympic silver and bronze medalists in athletics will have to wait until the 2028 Los Angeles Games for their turn to be rewarded.
Time now for French Connections. Time now for French Connections, our weekly look at the intricacies of life here in France with Solange Moujat. Solange, great to see you.
Hi, Dylan.
This week you're choosing to focus on how French people say goodbye. Interesting choice.
Yeah, we've already done a show on how the French greet one another. I thought we could do an explainer on au revoirs, or how the French say goodbyes. Of course, there is la bise and handshakes. But on the linguistic side, it is au revoir, which literally means see you again. Today, some people no longer pronounce the R as an au revoir, but it is the classic goodbye. Even if its common use actually only dates back to the 18th century, adieu was used before that. Now, on top of au revoir, there are also many other options. There's salut or see ya. It can be used to say hi as well. There's the old school adieu, which today has a finality to it, and a religious origin like adios or goodbye, which actually comes from God be with ye. Then there's à bientôt, which means see you soon. There's à tout de suite. It is sometimes shortened to à tout, see you in a second. There are also regional farewells. Like in Normandy, it's bonjour. And the French also use other languages. The Italian ciao, often ciao ciao, is often said in a joyous way, even if etymologically it means I am your servant. There is also tschüss and bye-bye. So there are a lot of ways to say farewell in France.
Merci bien. À bientôt. Au revoir.
Tu ça bien?
Bah ouais.
Sois prudent.
On est au courant.
Allez, va-t'en maintenant, c'est bon quoi. Allez, tout le monde tient ici, c'est bon maintenant.
When it comes to expressions, my personal favorite is bon vent, which literally translates to good wind. It's may the wind be in your sails. Then there's bonne continuation, or keep it up. Profitez bien, or enjoy. And since COVID, there's prenez soin de vous, take care. This has become popular since COVID. And finally, the often used, and especially in professional settings, it's bon courage. Now, this means either stay strong or good luck, depending on how you say it.
Bon courage, bonne chance et bon vent à tous les coureurs du Tour de France de Berlin jusqu'à Paris.
Now, Solange, let's turn to politics for a minute, because there have been some pretty famous political au revoirs.
Yeah, in France, there's the traditional passation de pouvoir, or the moment when an outgoing president or a minister hands the baton, says goodbye and hands the baton over to the next politician. There are also farewell speeches. Some of these have remained lodged in the collective French memory, like President Valéry Giscard d'Estaing's televised address after his defeat in 1981, when he turned his back on the camera.
Au revoir.
Then there are presidential funerals, which, like the passation de pouvoir, they are steeped in pomp, and when the former president's admirers, they come out to say a final goodbye.
Now, Solange, let's talk about that final farewell, because how the French choose to say goodbye is rather unique.
Yeah, from a demographics standpoint, the ultimate adieu from or death happens for some 70% of French people at the age of 75 or older. Life expectancy in France is 85, nearly 86 for women and 80 for men. That's according to l'INSEE's 2023 statistics. Now, over half of French deaths, they happen in hospitals, despite over 40, once death has occurred, over 40% are cremated. As for funerals, well, just over a third of French families choose religious ceremonies, about the same amount, a third have a civil ceremony, and the final third, well, they don't have a ceremony at all.
Est-ce que tu souhaites rester à domicile? Est-ce que tu souhaites aller dans une chambre funéraire où les gens peuvent éventuellement venir se recueillir?
J'ai vécu plusieurs décès pour savoir que, en fait, en plus de la peine, la question c'est qu'est-ce qu'il voulait?
Now, Solange, because this is France and French, things are complicated, so how you say goodbye in the written word is different than how you say it in the spoken word sometimes.
Indeed. But let's start first with the heartbreaking, and then we'll go into the lighter archaic. During the Second World War, over 150,000 French people were deported and sent to concentration camps. Over 100,000 of them were killed. Many wrote farewell letters.
Papa et maman, ainsi que grand-mère, vous envoient les plus gros et chers baisers avant de quitter Drancy. Nous partons heureux que vous ne soyez pas là, vivant l'enfer. Nous partons demain pour une destination inconnue.
Solange, moving on to something lighter, there's an interesting way of ending administrative letters in French, which we definitely don't use in English.
No, definitely not.
Tell us more about
this.
It's
the famous « Je vous prie, Madame, Monsieur », l'expression de mes sentiments distingués. These are our words du jour, and it literally translates to I beg you, sir or madam, to accept the expression of my distinguished feelings. Now, there are multiple versions of this sentence. It is indeed very complicated, but it is the way to end formal letters. It is a bit archaic, but it is still used today, especially with cover letters and when applying for jobs.
I have to Google this and copy-paste it.
Me too, every single time.
It's ridiculous after so many years in France. Finally, Solange, let's talk about jobs, as there have been many goodbye traditions in offices too.
Yeah, whether you're changing jobs or retiring, there is a tradition in France called the poud de départ, or a farewell party when you leave work for good or when you retire. It is often a festive and emotional moment.
Il est 12h30.
Je souhaite une bonne retraite. Je pense qu'on se reverra quand même.
Which brings me to why I chose this theme of farewell for this episode. The sad news is that this is my last French Connections for the near future. The happy news is that Florence Villeminot is back. So to use the French expression, which is also the song title of Auld Lang Syne, ce n'est que un au revoir.
Solange, we'll be seeing you around for sure.
Yeah.
Solange Mougin there with French Connections. And if you want to check other editions, you can check out our website, france24.com.
In 1971, the Bangladesh nation was born. It marked the end of a 9-month struggle for independence, which took the lives of as many as 3 million people.
My father told me that he saw during the war so much atrocities against the women and children.
Half a century later, the textile industry has given the nation a boost, but numerous natural disasters place Bangladesh at the forefront of climate change.
Back then we had fish, goats and cows and other dairy animals, but by adding more salt to the water, we lost everything.
A nation that is looking ahead, but must come to terms with its past. The birth of Bangladesh revisited on France 24 and France24.com.
France 24, your window on the world.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.
Alon D'Souza, and this is Paris Direct, the headlines this hour. Hamas's leader says Israel is, quote, delusional if it thinks killing members of his family will change the group's bargaining position. This as pressure mounts on Benjamin Netanyahu to accept a ceasefire. Spain's Prime Minister embarks on a European tour to drum up support for Palestinian statehood. Pedro Sanchez said the international community cannot help the Palestinian state if it does not recognize its existence. And Joe Biden says the bond between the United States and Japan is unbreakable. The US president hosted Japan's prime minister as tensions with Pyongyang are on the rise. Coming up in the program, we'll tell you how long it took a French athlete to scale 100 meters off the Eiffel Tower using only a rope. Plus, the organizers of the Cannes Film Festival have just announced which films are competing for the coveted Palme d'Or. Olivia Salazar-Winspear will be here with the details. Stay with us. But first, the leader of Hamas says the group will not be softening its position in ceasefire negotiations. The statement from Ismail Haniyeh comes after an Israeli strike in Gaza killed his 3 sons and several grandchildren. The deaths come as pressure mounts on Israel to change tack after Washington called Netanyahu's approach to the war a mistake.
A humble makeshift grave for the WESN.
Is under no obligation to give us what we expect. Sean Michael Small here before you once again. This is Talking Point on WESN, the content capital, television with a difference, in part because we truly broadcast in HD quality, but also we attempt to not shy away from the truth, even with practical considerations that we do have to adhere to from time to time. And unfortunately, part of the truth, I do wonder if we as a society, we're not really dealing with it, grappling with it. We're too accustomed to shelving things. We're too accustomed to, well, you know, that's sad, but that's them, and it's only affecting them. And for the rest of us, we jamming still. Everything nice. God is a Trinity, things will work out. You know, and when it comes to our property development, I don't want to be on the board. That's too much work. Somebody else will do it. And they'll do it properly, because I expect them to. Heavens forbid if somebody decides to take advantage of a situation for their own ends. No one expects that until it happens. Human nature is a hell of a thing. And now, to what extent anybody who's lived in a gated community will know what I'm talking about with regards to the stresses that your neighbors give you, the stresses of those who have to manage the property, to be on the board because everybody's owners, but no one actually wants to take the time to make the decisions of ownership.